Hello students, next we are going to see the cost sheet continuation for a complex problem. Before going into that, we will see the format for the cost sheet. So cost sheet for the particular company for the month of example January or February, they will calculating, we have to mention it. So let's see the format individually and what are the items in the format, and we will try to understand where we have to put the values in order to do the calculation of cost sheet. First, we have to calculate the base format is direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses will give you the prime cost. Here, the direct material will not be directly mentioned. Instead, they will give you as opening stock of raw material, then items to be added as raw materials which is purchased along with the opening stock. We have to add and then add carriage inward. Carriage inward it means that the transportation involved in transporting the raw direct material. It comes as carriage inward. Whenever you see the carriage inward in the problem, you can consider that it was a direct raw material transportation involved cost. So direct material cost will be adding along with opening stock of raw material, material purchase plus carriage inward minus closing stock of raw material. We have to subtract the closing stock of raw material. Once you do these things, we will get the direct raw material consumed. So direct raw material we have identified. We will be adding with direct labor and direct expense in order to form the prime cost. Once the prime cost is added, we will add the factory overheads to form the work cost or a factory cost as per the previous problem we have seen. So here the factory overheads, what are the items will be coming, we will be listed out. Here it will be mentioned as indirect material, indirect labor. So indirect word comes, it will be coming under factory, and factory words comes, it comes under the factory. So factory rent and rates, power and fuel is the uh, required for the factory to run, then factory lighting and supervision, factory works manager salary, factory water supply, factory insurance, factory stationery, factory cleaning and drawing office expenses, depreciation of plant and machineries, cost of research and equipment, and other factory expenses. These are the items we have to add under factory overheads. What are the items have to less is sale of scrap. Once something machinery or scrap has been sold from the factory, it doesn't indicate as an expense. It is just an income added. So we are just adding the income. So it's not involved in the cost. That's why we are not adding the cost of sale of scrap. We are just lessing the sale of scrap. It's just an additional revenue we got. So which should be added, not subtracted. So we are not adding along with the factory overheads. Instead, we are subtracting it from the cost because it's not the kind of an expense, it's kind of an income. Next, we'll add opening stock of work in progress less closing stock of work in progress. Initial case, what we had is direct material opening stock and closing stock as calculated for the direct material for the prime cost. But here inside the factory, the direct material will be converted into a product that will be in work in progress. That's why the raw material which I mentioned in the initial case will have converted to as work in progress material. So that is work in progress. We have to add the opening stock of work in progress minus closing stock of work in progress. Once we add all these items, we will get the work cost. So work cost, we will add office and administration overheads. So what are the office and administration overheads available are office rent and rates, office lighting, office stationery, depreciation and repairs of office furniture, office salary, management expenses, office telephone and postage charges, legal charges, bank charges and commission, office cleaning, audit fee, office insurance, and other office expenses all comes under the work cost. So once we add the work cost along with office and administration overheads, we will get the cost of production. So cost of production, we will be in the final stage of production. So there will be set of finished goods that will be given as opening finished goods and then closing finished goods. Opening we have to add with cost of production less subtract the closing of finished goods, we will attain the cost of production of goods sold. On the cost of production of goods sold, we will use the selling and distribution overheads. So selling and distribution overheads, we will consider the sales kind of thing: salesman salary, salesman commission, showroom expenses, showroom rent and rates, advertisement expenses, sales office rent and rates, traveling expenses, warehouse rents and rates, warehouse staff salaries, depreciations and repairs of delivery vehicle, carriage outwards. Carriage inwards we will consider as direct material transportation. Carriage outwards we will consider as products which is moved out to for sale. Next is debt collection charges and other and selling and distribution expenses. If we add the cost of production along with selling and distribution overhead, we will get the total cost or a cost of goods sold. From the cost of goods sold, if you have given the sales value, if you subtract it, we can attain as whether it's a profit or a loss. We can determine from data. So the format is quite expensive, quite complex, because for every overhead we have to understand what are the items will be available under particular overheads, and then we have to calculate the cost based on it. So we should understand what are the factory overhead items available. Along with we'll add a work in progress, less work in progress. Along with work cost, we will add the office and administration overheads. It involves office expenses together, and along with the cost of production, we will add finished goods and minus finished closing of finished goods. And the cost of production of goods sold, we will add selling and distribution overheads. So what are the items from the sales point of view: showroom sales and traveling expenses, warehouse expenses, carriage outwards, and other selling and distribution expenses. It will give you the total cost. Once the total cost is calculated, then if the sales value is provided, then if you subtract from the sales value, it will give you whether it's a profit or loss. Now let's see a simple problem for the cost sheet. So prepare a statement of cost of production on profit from the following data. Here the particulars they are mentioned as stock of raw materials, that is direct materials. This opening and closing balance they are mentioned. Then work in progress product also opening and closing balance they are mentioned. Stock of finished goods opening and closing balance are mentioned. Next, purchase for the year they have mentioned, and then sales, direct wage sales value they have mentioned, direct wages, work expenses, factory scrap sold they have mentioned, then office expense they have mentioned. First we have to prepare the cost sheet. The cost sheet will consist of direct material, direct wages and direct expenses. Here direct raw material consumed we have to calculate initially. So direct raw material consumed. For that, we, as per the format, what are the items we have to know is stock of raw material opening. So what is the opening balance of stock of raw material is 75,000. Next is we have to know what are the purchase of any new raw material taken place. So they have given us purchase for the year, that is mentioned as 65,700. Okay, next is we have to know whether the carriage inward is mentioned. In this case there is no carriage inward cost is added, so we are not adding that. And then we have to identify the closing stock of raw material, that we have to subtract. So here the closing stock of raw material is 78,750. For subtracting I have mentioned as minus sign. So it will give you the direct raw material consumed. Next we have to calculate direct wages. It is given directly, that is 51,450. These things we have can mention here. 61,950. Wages is 51,450. Next is direct expenses. We have to see whether any direct expenses mentioned here. No such thing mentioned. So prime cost is direct raw material consumption plus direct wages. So it will give you the prime cost. So once we are identifying the prime cost, we will add the factory overheads in order to determine the factory cost or a work cost. So here in factory overheads, we will have to understand what are the expenses given. One is work in progress they have mentioned. So work in progress opening we have to add, closing we have to subtract. 24,600. That is 27,300. So we have two less. That's why we have mentioned as negative value. Next is we have to understand what are the other things. Work expenses. Work expenses is 25,020. Okay. Next is under the factory, what are the other items will be coming? We have to check the list. Factory scrap sold will comes under factory expenses. Since factory scrap sold is kind of a revenue, it's not a expense. That's why we are subtracting the value minus 990. Otherwise, you would have added if it is an expense. So this sum will give you the overall factory overhead cost. So factory overheads we have calculated. So prime cost with factory overheads will give you the work cost or a factory cost. Then we have to add the office and administration expenses. Here the office and administration expenses they have mentioned only directly as office expense. So office expenses. So office expense they have mentioned as 20,610. So cost of production is factory cost with office expense. This give you the cost of production. Next we have to see any finished product of opening and closing as given. Yeah, they have mentioned a finished product opening and closing. So stock of finished goods opening we have to add, that is 52,080. Stock of finished closing, that is 47,250. So it should be negative value, so we have to mention as negative. Okay. Next we have to understand any selling and distribution expense they have given. In this case they have not mentioned as any selling and distribution expenses. So cost of goods sold is plus opening closing will give you the cost of goods sold. Next we have to understand any sales value they have mentioned directly. The sales value they have mentioned here in the problem is 2,16,930. So it's whether you have to check whether it's a profit or loss. The sales value minus cost of goods sold will give you whether it's a profit or loss. Here it is a profit. In this way we have to calculate the cost sheet preparation based on the availability of material. They are given the opening and closing balance and every subheadings, factory overheads, selling and distribution overheads. Here only we are given the items belonging to factory overheads. So we have included the in under factory overheads. Similarly, there will be a problem. It consists of selling and distribution expenses and office expenses with different items. So we have to understand what items belong to which category, and then we have to add under the subcategory, and then we have to form the cost sheet. And the next thing we will see about another problem for the cost sheet preparation. Thank you.